name is Catherine Murphy, and I'm the science coordinator for the program. As you just heard, this is just a quick reminder that today's seminar is going to be recorded, and we're going to make it available on our portal. So just to start off today, we've heard from many of you this year about incorporating existing resources into the collaborative program science and adaptive management planning. So today we're going to start that off by hearing about some of the conservation plans, programs, and tools that have been developed by the New Mexico Department of Game and Fish and its partners. So it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Dr. Matt Wunder. He's the chief of the Conservation Services Division for the New Mexico Department of Game and Fish in Santa Fe. And Matt's an active participant in the collaborative program. He serves on our executive committee, as well as sharing his expertise in natural resource management and conservation of threatened and endangered species. So without further delay, Matt, I'll hand it over to you. Thanks.
Very good, thank you. Let me get to screen share. Can everybody see the slide, or anybody see the slide?
Yes.
Okay, good. Good afternoon. As Catherine said, I'm Matt Wunder. I'm the chief of, actually it was Conservation Services Division, but it is now Ecological Environmental Planning Division at the Department of Game and Fish. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the information management tools that the department through the division have developed over the years. And then when we get done, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have. Okay, if I can figure out how to make the slide move forward. Okay, I guess I have to use the mouse for that. Let me get that back on. Okay, the conservation information system that the department has developed and is supported on our website, and you can see the link there to the conservation page, incorporates 6 different elements at this point. 2 of those we've called planning, and then we've got 2, the blue ones that are data related, and then the brown ones on the screen are related more directly to management. And this, as an overview, the Ecological Environmental Planning Division developed these in part while I've been the chief, and a couple of them have been around for considerably longer. And one of the things that we strive to incorporate in these, that the different tools are interrelated, and you'll see as I go through the slideshow how they're interrelated. Unfortunately, with concerns about how the internet works and things loading, I was not comfortable doing a live demonstration of these. But if you go, when you go to the website, and all of the things that you'll be looking at are live, basically. And the several of these help in, especially for the staff in my division that do technical guidance, review of projects that proponents submit. And this information was all brought together on this page to help present what the department has worked on related to conservation here in New Mexico. One of the chief partners that we've had in this process has been Natural Heritage New Mexico, and we have a long history of working with them, and a very productive history, I would say. And as you all probably know, Heritage, acquires data and information about biodiversity conservation and makes that available to the public. Every state does have a natural heritage program, and many of those across the country are housed with the State Wildlife Agency. Here in New Mexico, Natural Heritage's division of the Museum of Southwestern Biology at the University of New Mexico. And they have been an integral partner in developing 5 of the 6 components of the Conservation Information System. And this is just gives you a sense. I just want to touch base on the acronyms that I'll be referring to as I go through the presentation. And you can see those here: SWAT, CHAT, RIP Map, the NMCIS, BISON-M, and Share with Wildlife. And you can see the dates for each of these are the dates that they were essentially brought online. And the Riparian Map will be brought online in this coming year. So the first thing I want to talk about is the Crucial Habitat Assessment Tool. And this program or project was developed through partnership with the Western Governors Association a while ago. And essentially, they received a grant and tried to develop a regional planning tool that large landscape scale projects could look at and try to get a sense of how states interpret the value of wildlife habitat. And basically, the darker the blue color, the more important the habitat. And one of the chief goals of this effort was to coordinate the state programs so that there was consistency across the West. So initially, they developed the West-wide chat, and then as an outgrowth of that, the department worked with Natural Heritage to expand on that for the New Mexico chat. As I say, consistent West-wide map at essentially 70,000 foot level, looking at regional landscape level project planning. And this program has connections throughout the conservation information system to some of the other tools, the SWAP and some of the data layers in the environmental review tool. And this tool, the Crucial Habitat Assessment Tool, although it was developed by the Western Governors Association, it has been taken over within the last couple of years by the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. And at this point, they are coordinating the updates and data integration for that. And it has quieted down a little bit in terms of its activity. And my last conversation with the people at WAFWA said that they understand they have this tool and they're trying to find ways to adapt it to some of the other initiatives that they have. And so at this point, the tool has been developed. We provide updates to them to incorporate new data that we have, and we'll see where that moves forward in the future. So that's one of the tools or the projects in the Conservation Information System. The next one I want to talk about a little bit is the State Wildlife Action Plan for New Mexico. And the department, as the State Wildlife Agency, is eligible to receive funding from the State Wildlife Grants Program. In order to do that and to qualify for this program, our department and all state agencies that participate had to develop a State Wildlife Action Plan. We developed a comprehensive wildlife conservation strategy in 2006. And then in 2015, we started updating this. And ultimately, we produced the document that you see, and that's located on the department's conservation webpage. The document itself is approximately 380 pages long. It's a long and dense document, and it's not readily usable. And so as a result of that, we secured a grant from the Fish and Wildlife Service to develop a web portal to present this information in a more easily digestible format. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about here today. One of the tools I'm talking about here today. The website itself was designed to be user-friendly, and so that it can, access, the revised plan that was, submitted in 2016, approved in 2017. The website follows the format of the official document, which we did submit in hard copy to the Fish and Wildlife Service, and they subsequently approved, as they do for all state wildlife action plans. Some of the major components of the Wildlife Action Plan are the species of greatest conservation need, ecoregions, key habitats, threats, and conservation actions. Now, some of these are required elements of all the SWAPs, and the structure of the document is left up to states. And so the ecoregions was a little bit different, was not a specific requirement, but what was one that we followed. And like I said, this qualifies the department to apply for those state wildlife grants. And potentially, if the Recovering America's Wildlife Act is passed and funds flow from that, this state wildlife action plan is a requirement to receive those funds. And like the other tools, this is interrelated with the BISON-M species accounts, and it also informs the Share with Wildlife project proposal development process that I'll talk about a little bit later. And so this is the web page when you get to it, and you can see the link down at the bottom. All of these, like I say, are easily accessible through that, the round figure. You can click on those links and it'll bring you right to these different tools. Now, when we developed this state wildlife action plan, we based it on US EPA level 2 ecoregions as a standard sort of organizational tool. And there are 6 ecoregions in New Mexico. You can see the map on this web page at the beginning of the web, on the web page when you get into the swap. And then, let me go back just for a second here. I'd like to point out that on the left side of the screen, you have the navigation tools within the State Wildlife Action Plan. Across the top, this blue bar provides links to the other tools that I'll be talking about as well. And then in the right border is where we will house additional information that might be available, but not necessarily in the swap. Okay, so we've got 6 ecoregions, and these are fairly obvious landscape features: mountains, grasslands, deserts, plateaus. And as I say, they are recognized. This is developed through the US EPA. And then once you're in this, you can see the overall distribution of the ecoregions in the state. And then you've got these, the 6 images below are links to those specific ecoregions. And so you can click on one of those ecoregions, and that'll take you to the specific ecoregion that we're talking about. And within each of those ecoregions, we provide a brief description of the ecoregion itself up above. There are a list of the different habitats that are found within the ecoregion and some of the species that are found within that. And you've got the organizational fields across here, birds, lizards, fish, mammals, etc. And you can click on that, and that'll take you to more details about those specific species that you can then click on to get more information. And so if you then go to a species, you want to go to a species page, you get to the species, and this is the overview of the species. And like the ecoregions, you can get to these species through an ecoregion page, or you can use that left navigation bar and go directly to the species of greatest conservation need page. And again, we have the taxonomic groups, brief descriptions of the species, and importantly, how those species were selected. And you can see up above here, and I think I should be able to, I hope you can read it, the criteria that was used for selecting species of greatest conservation need. And just briefly, those are declining species, vulnerable species, which are vulnerable for some specific reason, endemic species only found here in New Mexico, the disjunct species that have populations that are geographically isolated from other populations, or keystone species that are crucial to the integrity and functioning of ecosystems that they inhabit. And these are the criteria that the department used while selecting species. And we ended up with a total of 235 species, which includes threatened and endangered species, whether state or federally listed. We did not include any of the game or other species commonly protected through the department by regulation, such as game species, sport fish, and those sorts of things. And these species are also typically species that have limited sources of alternative funding other than the state wildlife grant program to provide us with money to work with them. So if you're at the species of greatest conservation need page, and say you click on the reptiles image, that will take you to a list of, or a grid with the reptiles that we have incorporated as species of greatest conservation need. And in this case, we're going to look a little bit at the western river cooter as a species that we had selected. When you do that, then you click on that, it'll take you to a web or a page within the SWAP that provides, the brief description of the western river cooter or whatever species that you're looking at. Down below, it points out which ecoregions that species is found in, and then some of the key habitats that species will use. And then if you continue on down, there's a series of descriptions of potential threats to the species and habitat and potential conservation actions that can be taken. And also, let me go back one second. And the additional information page that you see on the left side there provides a link to the BISON-M system, which provides much more detail than just this short paragraph of the species description. And if you click on that link, it will take you to the species booklet in the BISON-M, which is the Biota Information System of New Mexico. And in BISON-M, there's a great deal of detail, on taxonomy, legal status, species distributions, habitat associations, food habits, environmental associations, et cetera. And so, each one of these species that we have ideally would have some of this information. Obviously, with over 6,000 species in New Mexico, we don't have complete information for many of those species, but we do have quite a bit of information for some of the species, and then some species we have much less. But again, you can once you get to a species page like this, you can then go and start looking at whatever particular information you want, management practices or whatever. And when you're back at the species page in the SWAP, if you go down below, and I mentioned that it talks about the habitats that the species occupies in that ecoregion. And so if you click on that habitat, in this case, the arid west interior freshwater emergent marsh, and if you click on that, what it will do is it'll take you to the habitat page within the State Wildlife Action Plan that describes that habitat in a longish paragraph. And it also then provides, there's links also to additional resources, and I'll touch base on that in a little bit. I would point out that if you go down below, you see the picture grid, and that talks about additional species that are found within that use that habitat or found within it. And if you look at the additional information bar on the right, you see this outline of New Mexico. If you look really carefully on some of the more widespread habitats, they will be displayed here and gives you a sense of their distribution across the state of New Mexico. So at this point, you get this information in the SWAP about the habitats. And then the other way you can get to that habitats is, as I said, if you go to when you get to that home page of the SWAP, on the left side, the navigation pane, that will take you to the habitat page. And in New Mexico, we've got 33 key terrestrial habitat types. These are based on the National Vegetation Classification System at the macro group level. And The habitat distributions that we have used were based on the Southwest REGAP analysis to provide distributions. And the map, you can see in the image there that shows where the habitat, the distribution of some of the habitats, which the habitats are, and then provides a description of those, what those habitats constitute. In order to make it a little more manageable to work through these, we do provide a picture grid of general habitat types down below, things like aquatic or plains, mesa, grasslands. And so we grouped similar types of habitats in there so it'd make it easier for people to move through and look for those. So if you go to one of those groups, you'll pull up the list of habitats, and if you then click on a particular habitat, in this case, using the Madrian lowland evergreen woodland as an example of the habitat. And as I mentioned, on the right side, we have additional information, and you can see the outline map of New Mexico and the areas where this habitat, at least modeled habitat, is found throughout the state. Down below on the habitat page, you get the list of species that typically will use that habitat. So it provides that link to those species. Then if you click on that one of those images below, that will then take you to that species page, which then can link you to the BISON-M for additional information. The habitats that we used, as I mentioned, are based on the U.S. National Vegetation Classification System. And we did this for several reasons. First and foremost, it was recommended by the Fish and Wildlife Service as a good system to use nationwide. National Vegetation Classification System is a nationwide system that describes habitats across the nation in a variety of different details. It is a peer-reviewed system, so the descriptions that you see when you go from the SWAP web page on a habitat to the National Vegetation Classification System, if the scientists that maintain and update the lists of habitats have made changes, they will be reflected when you make that link from the SWAP to the National Vegetation Classification System. And the classification reports for the macro groups are quite detailed. This is just the first couple paragraphs of multiple pages that describe these habitats in much greater detail. So a very good source of information that's maintained and updated on a regular basis. For threats, we looked at a variety of different potential ways to identify threats, and we settled on the system developed by Solasky et al. In 2008. And this was adopted by the International Union for Conservation of Nature and the Conservation Measures Partnership. And it classifies threats to species or habitats throughout the world, and it does so at multiple different levels. These are some of the main level 1 and 2 threat categories that are identified. These are all the usual suspects, residential, commercial development, transportation, biological resource use, human intrusions, pollution, climate change. And so we categorized, we looked at the threats to the species and habitats through this filter of, which of these threat categories might be applicable to those habitats or species, and then potentially subsequent conservation actions that could be used to address these. And I point out at this stage that this SWAP is a statewide planning document, and as such, it is a generalized document. So we do not have specific project-specific conservation actions or threats. These are, this is a high-level overview of the state and provides a starting point for people to consider, what might be threatening particular habitats or species. Now, conservation actions, As I said, they're general, not project specific, and obviously they're subject to change as new information is developed. Because the department typically does not have authority outside of, fish and game, as it were, it requires partner collaboration to implement some of these conservation actions. And as we were developing the SWAP, we had a core team. We invited all of the federal agencies, many of the other state entities, tribes, and other interested groups to participate. And it is through those stakeholders and partners that we can collaborate to help implement some of the conservation actions that we identify. Obviously, we don't have all the money in the world, and so there are resource limitations, and these generally preclude direct monitoring of effectiveness of some of these conservation actions. And it also is part of the reason why not all of the species in BISON-M have detailed information, and all of these should be considered potential actions. In addition to that, we also identified within the State Wildlife Action Plan some conservation opportunity areas. And you can think of these as places on the landscape where we felt that biodiversity was particularly high, and that the combination of land ownership patterns made it more likely that there were opportunities to provide conservation action within those areas. There was public land, for lack of a better term, in most of these conservation areas of some sort. And we don't have, none of the conservation opportunity areas are composed entirely of private land. So as I say, part of the reason for that was their land ownership that contributed to making them more usable. And so when you click on one of those links to one of the conservation opportunity areas, you get a breakdown. In there is a brief description of the conservation opportunity area. There's a map on the upper left that provides where this area is located, both within the state and then on the ground. And we followed the convention that was developed with the crucial habitat assessment tools, and we used 1 square mile hexagons as the unit of area to include, as opposed to the standard square miles that we typically would see in some of our other that you would often see in a map. And so you've got a list of the habitats within there, the size of those habitats within the area, and then some of the species that are identified. And again, you can keep, every time you see one of these grids with species, you can click on that, and that takes you back to the species. And then on the right side, you've got the map, so that if you're looking at this conservation opportunity area and you want to look at another one, you can go to the map on the right side, and that'll take you to another one. Okay, so that's the State Wildlife Action Plan. And directly related to that, although it was preceded by the Share with Wildlife program, which I'm going to talk about next. And this is a department grant program, and we use that to fund wildlife enhancement, research, education, and wildlife rehabilitation projects. Those are the 4 key areas that this program will support. It is comprised, the money comes from voluntary contributions, things like license plate sales. You've seen the Roadrunner, the fish, the mule deer, the quail. When people purchase those plates, part of those funds go to the Share with Wildlife program. And also tax check-offs, and a much smaller amount comes from direct contributions. Program focus on species that don't have other sources of funding. And I mentioned that a little earlier in conjunction with the species of greatest conservation need. And since 2005, when the initial CWCS was developed, the Share with Wildlife program has focused on these species of greatest conservation need. And again, this program is linked to BISON-M and the swap revision. And when you get to the web page on the department's website, this is what it looks like. There's a link. This is the link to that web page. It talks a bit about the program. And so over the past decade, the program has funded about 89 projects, focusing on somewhere around 75 different species. On average, we get about 14 projects per year that we will fund, depending on the amounts requested and the quality of the projects, but in some cases up to 24 different projects per year. And over that past decade, we've dispersed about $1.9 million to over approximately 52 different contractors. And you can see the breakdown below here. Most of that money goes toward supporting research, typically on species or habitats. Education, environmental education, about 15%, 10% for rehabilitation work, the wildlife centers that take in injured animals and take care of those. And we have been spending a small amount on habitat, but typically habitat projects can be, as we're familiar from the collaborative program, habitat is an expensive undertaking when you're modifying habitats. The recent revenue that we've received in the last 2 fiscal years, you can see the breakdown, but it comes in, it was about $112,000 in fiscal year 2020, and that jumped up to $133,000 in fiscal year 21. And you can see that the bulk of that comes from both the license plate sales is a big source of revenue, and then online licensing system. When people come to the department's licensing system to purchase a license, they're given the option to contribute to the Share with Wildlife program. And so we get funding that way, tax checkoffs. And as I said, very small amounts of money coming from direct mail donations. And so that's the Share with Wildlife program. Now I want to talk a little bit about the Biota Information System of New Mexico. And we've seen this before in some of those species pages describing them. So it's a web-enabled database. There are over 6,800 species accounts. As I said, some have more information than others. Some have very little information. Accounts contain information on distributions, biology, ecology, references. And then again, this tool is connected both to the Share with Wildlife contracts. It informs the State Wildlife Action Plan revision, the New Mexico Environmental Review Tool reports, and it is directly linked to the Environmental Review Tool. So when you get to the homepage for the BISON-M, this is what you see. And you see across the bottom, these 4 different windows. And these represent the kinds of some of the search types that you can conduct through BISON-M. And to have species, you can do a county report to see what species are found in a particular county. You can look for documents within the database, or even contracts. And so I'll run through and show a couple of the results of these. And so first, if we're doing a species search, you'll come up when you hit one of that, you click on that grid, it'll take you to this page. There are a lot of potential ways that you can narrow a search. This is a fairly straightforward one. We entered a least shrew as a common name. Then you click the search button over on the right, and then that'll give you a list, or it'll bring up the list of species below. If you're not looking for a particular species, it might bring up a number of species. This one, it brought up the least shrew. And so when we click on that link, it'll take us to the least shrew webpage in BISON-M. And again, you've got information about the species here in New Mexico. And it talks about taxonomy, legal status, distribution, habitats, food, et cetera, management practices and references. And each one of those you can expand and see what information is available under each one of those headings. So that's probably one of the more common searches that people might do. Another search that you could do is for some of the documents that are incorporated into BISON-M. And in this case, I just clicked on, I just entered conservation as a topic, did a search, and then that brought up this list of documents that refer to that. And so then you can see there are hyperlinks that'll take you to the document itself or the species account over here. So here we looked for conservation, and it's talking about dune sagebrush lizard. Again, you click on that and it'll take you to that web page. So that's the document search. In addition to that, you can also do contract searches because a lot of the work that informs BISON-M comes through contracts that I was talking about a little bit ago with the Share with Wildlife program. And so this is the page that describes the contract search. And as you can see, it's set up so that the contract year is 2020. The topic or the type is wildlife research. You click on the search button, and then you get this list of documents, contracts that it has pulled up. And some of those documents do have links that you can then go and see exactly what's in that document. Some of them don't. So again, more information about work and information within BISON-M. The next thing I want to talk about is the environmental review tool. And this is a website for project proponents to enter details on proposed projects to initiate an EAP review. And one of the main functions of the Ecological Environmental Planning Division is technical guidance, in which we look at, or people will submit projects that they're planning to conduct or initiate and ask us, what impacts might, if they do this, what might be some of the impacts to either wildlife or habitat. So it's a significant component of the work of the division. The NMCIS will generate, if you're just looking for a species list, it'll generate a species list, or it'll develop a report for you. We developed this system through Natural Heritage with NatureServe. The idea being that we get a lot of requests for project reviews that are fairly straightforward. Things like replacing windows in HUD housing, putting up cell towers in urban areas, things that are fairly straightforward and shouldn't require a lot of analysis, but just the volume of them creates a problem for us. And this tool will go through and analyze the projects that are entered into it. And if it's a fair, based on the criteria of the project, if it's a simple project, it may not require any additional review, but if it's a more complex project, then it would be bounced up to one of the habitat biologists to look at and provide more detailed custom comments. And so I say the staff coordinate the evaluations of these and to provide guidelines or ideas on how to mitigate projects. And again, it's connected through BISON-M and the other tools on the Conservation Information System. So when you get to the environmental review tool, this is the homepage, and it provides a brief description of that. You can then go and you can see up above here, you have some options. Create a project map is what we're going to talk about next. And this is where a project proponent would click on that, and then it would start asking for information. And one of the first things it does, because it is a geographic or geospatially referenced program, so we ask people to provide a location on the maps. We have base maps, which include, multiple layers, and you can see on the side, as I click through these, some of the different layers that are available as in the base map, whether it's counties or critical habitats or state forestry priority landscapes. There's multiple layers that are available to look at in the space map. And so somebody comes up, they've got a project, they if you zoom in enough on the map, you can introduce or you can draw a project boundary with your mouse, essentially. So you put that in there, you enter it, the program will ask for additional information. And in this case, for that project, they were just looking for a species list. And so that it generates a species list for people that are interested in, if they're only interested in what species were found within that polygon that they drew, they would get this list. And again, you click on the links over here and it'll take you to the species accounts. And if you're interested in more than just a species list, it will actually develop a project report. This is page 1 of 5 of a fairly simple communications installation report. And it has all the, standard language about, limitations, et cetera. But we are trying to encourage people to utilize the system to submit projects to the department for, our review. If you have a project that you want reviewed, we try to encourage people to use this because it not only will help take care of some of the simpler program or projects that shouldn't need a great deal of additional review, but it also serves as a information management system for the department to maintain information about projects and activities that we've reviewed, activities that staff are involved with, and things like that, and provides a long-term record for us that's easily searchable. And so you can go back and look up, what projects, if there are specific projects you're interested in, you can look those up. You can get copies of the letters that we send to the proponents as in response to their submissions. So the next thing I want to talk about is the Riparian Map. And this one will be completed in calendar year 2022. This is a statewide data set, and it provides some very detailed information about plant communities in the riparian habitats across the state of New Mexico. And this information is useful, for the department, for restoration projects, planning, technical reviews, or for a variety of things. The map is partially available now. Like I say, will be completed in 2022. And it's connected to most of the other tools that we have in the Conservation Information System. When you go to you follow the link to the Riparian Map or RIP map, this is what you'll see. And you see it provides some information about some of the products that are available and provides a location where you can download information from the website. And this is hosted at Natural Heritage New Mexico. They are the partner that has been developing this, and we've been working on it for a number of years. And like I say, we're almost done, and it's continuously being updated and improved as we go. The first thing that we did, or Heritage did, when developing the RIP map was define the Riparian Corridor. And this is a map of the perennial stream corridors in New Mexico. The different colors represent the groupings of streams that Heritage used, so that they'd work in the lower Pecos. They deal with that map segment at once. They do the Gila at once, Middle Rio Grande, the Canadian Cimarron, and Upper Rio Grande, San Juan. So that's just how Heritage was organizing the production of the map. This is just a part of the map legend that's available through the website. There also is an annotated version of this that is much more detailed, and it provides information about the different vegetation types that you would see. This is a screenshot of a detail on Middle Rio Grande, and it shows some of the habitats. And I have clicked on this one, the little green polygon there, which is forest and woodlands, and it talks a little bit about it, some of the characteristics of it. And you can see on the right, you can choose the level of detail that you want to look at. And if you hit one of these 3 buttons here, it'll give you a drop-down list that can then provide you with the metadata down below. And so it is a very detailed map, and lots of information there. The habitats that we talked about that are mapped in the Riparian Map also are derived and related to the National Vegetation Classification System. And so you're able to link between the map and these classifications to look at more details about those habitats. And in this case, we're looking at down here the Western Interior Riparian Forest and Woodland Group. And so if you go to that detail, again, it'll take you to the National Vegetation Classification System page, report for that, much more detailed information about that. And so with that, I would be quite happy to answer any questions that folks might have. And let me stop, well, I guess I'll leave the screen share on in case people, well, no, I'll stop sharing and I go back if need be.
Thank you, Matt. We have 21 folks on the Zoom room. Those who want to ask questions, you can either type your questions into the chat and I'll read them out, or you can unmute yourself and just verbally say your question.
Hi, Matt. Thank you for the great presentation and the really good information. And it's good to be updated on where things are at with the Riparian Map and just the range of resources that are available in this database, which is great. I think it's on even a lot beyond BISON in the old days.
Yep.
When I first started working for the district, I was wondering the important plant areas that are coverage on your maps. Are those the same plants that are in New Mexico's rare plant list or rare plant strategy? And I was wondering how the department implements the rare plant strategy on your lands and refuges, because it's an area, you know, rare plants and plant conservation don't tend to get as much attention or funding. So I was just curious.
Yeah, and the department, aside from our properties, we don't have any regulatory authority over plants, and that is typically conducted by Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Department in the Forestry Division. And so, in terms of those plants being in the map, was your question whether their rare plants are part of the map areas?
Yeah, you have a coverage, at least on one map, that's called, I think, like important plant areas. And I was wondering if those were really from the same list.
Oh, I think that was actually important bird areas.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I guess I misread that. I thought it was plants.
No, I did zip through it pretty quickly, but that is one of the layers that we use in the environmental review tool. And but it is the important bird areas.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So in terms of on game and fish owned lands and refuges, how have you interfaced or begun to implement the rare plant strategy?
It would be typically with coordination with forestry. Number one, making, understanding where these rare plants are located and ensuring that, at least for our properties that, we don't do anything to adversely impact those. Also, when we get requests for project analysis in the environmental review tool, that is some of the information that we can also bring in and refer. If a project is submitted and the polygon that they're planning on working might contain rare plants, we would reference that in the report, and that would be the customized report that would say, in addition to these other things, you may find these plants here, and you should, contact, MNRD and the Forestry Division, for specific information and, approaches to dealing with those plants.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions? Thank you, Matt, for your time. This was incredibly helpful and informative. There will be a write-up of this seminar in our next newsletter. We will also be posting the recording of this onto our program portal. And if there's any other follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to Matt directly. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for coming.